decided to come on out and do yet another of these type of videos. And one of the thoughts that I'd considered, and I'm just going to go ahead on with the thoughts that I considered before I get into exactly what I want to talk about, is that, and it's something that I actually used in a book that I wrote almost 15 years ago. I used a line from a character in which the character tried to talk reason or logic to the person by saying, hey, 1 times 1 equals 1. Why would somebody say 1 times 1 equals 1? Well, simply put, we have been taught, we have learned, it has been basically mathematical fact that 1 times 1 equals 1. But in the cynical world that we live in, the tone deaf world that we live in, and a world that has been disoriented by disinformation, gaslighting, and outright lies. I would venture to say that there's a segment of the population that would argue me to their grave that 1 times 1 may not equal 1. And that's a sad thing to think of, a sad commentary, a sad indictment that there is a sector of the population that may argue that 1 times 1 does not equal 1, especially if the person to whom that they have beholden to electorally tells them that 1 times 1 may not equal 1 or doesn't equal 1. Outright, just say it doesn't equal 1. Unless I say it does, it may not equal 1. And that is essentially how I see what had happened with this election. I know that folk have their right, they have their privilege, they have their agency to be disillusioned or to be cynical, to be not trusting of the world around them. But I've begun to kind of creep back above the surface and look at some of the fallout. Like I kind of made the analogy from a couple of videos ago about how when I returned from hip replacement surgery and began bowling for money again, it was 2019 was a very bad and frustrating year for me because I practiced fairly well, but when it came to tournaments, bowling in tournament conditions, it was the same bad results throughout much of 2019. And I mentioned that what I did was somewhat of an autopsy of the shots that I had been bowling over the course of several tournaments. And I noticed a certain pattern of shots that I would leave. I'd noticed that by certain frames when when I started encountering lane transition, certain results would occur. And I knew that one of the problems was ball speed because obviously while I was physically able to bowl again, I was physically able to practice and bowl an entire tournament. I lost ball speed. And because of the tournament conditions that I was bowling on, you needed ball speed to get through certain lane transitions. That was just one of the things. The other thing was how because of certain leaves, I'm attributing some of it to ball speed, but also how I was playing the shots. So now I've begun to look at certain things in the post-mortem of this election. And one of the things that I continue to see is how people were convinced that the economy was horrible. And there may be some truth to it, despite all information. Now, you also have to consider the source of the information because I'm looking at information where there is non-partial, where there is supposedly a middle bias. It's a non-partial bias, neutral people. And what people were what was pretty much the consensus was that Joe Biden and inherently Kamala Harris were excoriated for the inflation that was a result of trying to correct for things that had gone out of hand due to the end of the Donald Trump presidency and how he handled the COVID and the shutdowns and and also as people began to come back, come emerge out of the shutdowns, how the demand had taken off, but the supply chains could not keep up with the demand, and therefore supply and demand. If there's a great demand for something and there's not much of supply, you can damn near name your price. It's like with any business. When you have somewhat of an edge on a certain market or a certain segment of a market, a certain niche of a market, you're in demand. You can name your price. But yeah. So unfortunately, in business though, I mean, it was bad. It was bad. Yes, prices took off, but nobody seemed to complain about the lack of supply during the pandemic. I didn't hear people blame Trump for the lack of supply during the pandemic. If you recall, back in March 2020, as soon as word got out, the shelves were bare. I remember going to Walmart the next morning. You could not find paper products, you could not find food, you could not find anything. And then as the supply came back, stores were limiting what you can buy. You could only buy so many of certain things because people would hoard. They would buy everything and then keep it for themselves. Inherently, people are selfish by nature. But nobody talked about that. Nobody really talked about that. Nobody reminded Trump of that. But everybody remind, hey, I'm paying $6 for this and $5 for this. God damn it, I don't like this. But here's what the economists were saying. The economists were saying that depending on who you look at, during the Biden era, income rose at a rate higher than during the Trump era, the first Trump presidency. Depending on which time frame that you look at, just before the shutdowns, or even if you look at another point when Biden took over. If you look at right after Biden took over, income almost had kept pace with inflation. But if you look at it beforehand, income was above. The point is that there is credible information to say that the shutdowns had a lot to do with it. And then when people started coming back out, the demand, the supply the supply did not keep up with the demand, and the prices shot up. It's also said that because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, also sent shockwaves through the petroleum markets worldwide, and that's in part as people started driving again in the United States, and then you had 10% of the world supply. Although United States was not a customer of Russia, but other parts of the world were customers of Russian oil. The fact of the matter is, as people started driving again, the demand shot up, and the supply did not keep up with the demand, and the prices took off. And so there were measures that Biden did, but like selling parts of the strategic reserve to try to offset those prices. And what's not talked about was that strategic reserve actually was, when it was sold, the U.S. profited billions of dollars. And that reserve has already been replenished. That's the other thing too. But people didn't want to hear that. They heard what they wanted to hear. And it was framed in such a way that people heard what they wanted to hear. So no matter how people were saying, at least from the macro perspective, how 1 × 1 = 1, nobody didn't want to hear that. Fuck 1 × 1 = 1. I don't even know if 1 is 1. That's kind of the mindset of some people. They question, how do you know that's 1? First of all, And then if you perform the operation of 1 times 1 equals 1, does it equals 3/4, half, 6, 2, 31, 2,275, 2,275,000? Who knows? That's kind of the mindset of some people. And then what's kind of what I've seen in over the last couple of days, at least in the social media realm, at least like on YouTube, I've seen people who said all these things about how, yeah, you're fucking liberal. Yeah, yeah, deal with it. And a lot of these people didn't even vote themselves, but yet they're talking shit. You're talking shit and didn't vote. Well, I learned decades ago that I couldn't talk shit about anybody if I were not a participant in the process. That at least gives me a right to say something and it's not empty. I backed what I said with my vote. But you got people who didn't vote. And I'm not talking about just the black vote. I'm just talking about people in general. While there's over 100 as of the current count, as of today, um, November 8, 2024, there's about 145 million ballots that have been cast. Um, there was about roughly 160 million ballots that were cast in 2020. And it's trending to where it's going to be anywhere between somewhere around 15 million less votes, going down to a level to 2016. So that means there were people who just decided to sit out. Could that have made a difference? Probably not. And I'm not going to be naive to say that. But I want to point out some other things. I find it amusing that people actually believe that the person whom they voted for, the majority of this electorate actually voted for, believed that this guy said that he had nothing to do with Project 2025. And if you listen to what he's been saying already, he's saying how he has a mandate to do certain things. That is the very words that was used in the Project 2025 text. Mandate. He's easing in some of the very words that were already used, that was already in that text. This guy knew exactly what was going on. JD Vance contributed to certain material in Project 2025, and he claims that yes, look it up. Look it up, man. Look it up. These people are they're gonna try to execute that game plan. Watch out. Watch out. I could talk about what are some of the things that Project 2025 are looking to accomplish, but I'll go back to the other argument about economy. While there is credible information that is saying the economy is actually well in that is doing better than a lot of places, and yes, there's credible information that's saying that the electorate, while yeah, you're telling me that, but I don't see it because I'm paying $5 for a loaf of bread when I should be paying, at least in my opinion, $2.99 for a loaf of bread, or hell, even $2.49 for a loaf of bread. I get your argument, but guess who is more than likely, if you understand who the person that you voted for, guess who's likely to take credit for that economy come 1201 January 20th 2025? Guess who's likely to say, oh, the economy is great. I told you that the economy was going to be great. I told you that I'd fix the fucking economy. That's why you voted for me. All because of a matter of time, because of 1 minute, if you may make the argument, because of 1 minute, all of a sudden he can declare that the economy is better, and I have fixed this son of a bitch. Now watch for the prices to come down. Watch for the oil prices to come down. Watch for the food prices to come down. Watch for your rent to come down. It doesn't really work like that. I mean, realistically speaking, I mean, if you've already signed a lease, they're not going to turn around and break the lease and say, "Hey, we're gonna drop your lease by 10%." That's not how it works. But yet, people want to remember what they want to remember. They want to read what they want to read. They want to accept certain facts as they want to accept facts, and that's something that, unfortunately, what I also see is that you've got a society, you've got an electorate that is tuned out. And you know what? This may not be a direct example, but I'm gonna point this out before I wrap up this particular segment of the Gig Geezer. Now, what I've noticed over the last couple of days is that there is some truth that life goes on. You still got to get up and do what you have to do. At every place that I've gone, at every junction which I've interacted with people, I've seen people pretty much doing what they're doing. I don't know if some people are out there putting on their best face in light of the election, but I can tell you that one person whom I encountered today pretty much voiced the same sentiment that I have. She asked me, well, because of the nature of the visit, have you encountered stressful situations in the last 10 days? I said, the election. And she shook her head, and I know. I said, yeah, we got to move on with this particular conversation. Maybe another time. But yeah, that was my answer. So I know that there are people out there that are putting on their professional face and going about doing what they need to do. There are some people who can't contain their glee and excitement, but I would venture to think that there's a larger number of people who don't give a fuck one way or another. But that's the world that we live in. Not everybody's engaged in what's going on out there. Not everyone is engaged to the extent that they actually research things for themselves. I noticed that a lot of things that I'd seen in people comments were actual talking points and not actual facts. And what I find funny is that one person asked me, name one thing that you can count that benefited you during the Biden presidency. I came back with 3 things, and then I was castigated at, oh, that's just socialism. In other words, I came back with these exact things pointing to the actual legislative or policy accomplishments of Joe Biden's presidency, essentially saying 1 × 1 = 1. But in presenting that information, this person's telling me, fuck no, that ain't 1 × 1. No, not at all. So that's all I have to share for this particular segment of the Gig Geezer, and I'm Inwood Lane.